Hello and welcome to The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here's what's coming up within the hour. U.S. stock markets dropped sharply after another day of turmoil sparked by Donald Trump's tariffs. Israel carries out fresh air strikes on Gaza following orders on retaliation of a Hamas attack. Plus, Indians warned of high temperatures this week. Let's begin. U.S. markets dropped sharply again on opening after another day of worldwide market turmoil sparked by Donald Trump's tariffs. Trading has opened down 3.99% for the Dow Jones, 4.21% on the Nasdaq, and 4.18% on the S&P 500, the three main Wall Street indexes indicating the value of stocks in major U.S. companies. The S&P 500 tracks 500 of the biggest firms in the U.S., making it one of the widest measures of the U.S. stock market. It has dropped again at the opening, suggesting a fall of roughly 13% since Trump announced his tariff. Now, if the drop holds at the end of the day, that will put it down roughly 20% since its most recent high in February, a milestone officially known as a bear market. The Nasdaq index, where many tech firms are listed, plunged into a bear market last week, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average, another major index in the U.S., is close. Meanwhile, the U.S. president has called on Americans not to be weak or stupid, saying the tariffs, which are a tax on imports, are bringing in billions of dollars a week. However, in his post on social media, Trump wrote that China did not acknowledge his warning for abusing countries not to retaliate. He called out China for imposing an additional 34% tariff on goods from the U.S. and refers to the sharp drops across Asian stock markets today, saying that they've made enough for decades, taking advantage of the good old USA. President Trump said the long-time abused USA is bringing in billions of dollars a week from the abusing countries on tariffs that are already in place. He adds that oil prices are going down, which was covered earlier, and then further claims that interest rates and food prices are also dropping, though these have not been verified. Hedge fund manager and one of Donald Trump's billionaire backers, Bill Ackman, has urged the president to pause his recently announced trade tariffs or risk a self-induced economic nuclear winter. Ackman says the president should take 3 months to allow countries to renegotiate their trading relationships with the U.S. His warning was echoed by another prominent Wall Street figure, with J.P. Morgan Chase chairman Jamie Dimon, saying that Trump's tariffs risk pushing up prices for Americans. Despite the shockwaves, the American president has defended his new import taxes, saying that sometimes you have to take the medicine to fix something. And more impact on the Trump tariffs on the Asian markets. The Hong Kong stock market saw a 13.2% drop earlier today, its largest one-day decline since the 1997 crisis, as a massive sell-off was triggered by U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs and China's retaliatory levies. Also, Taiwan's stock market experienced a historic loss of over 2,000 points, accounting for 9.7% at its opening session today, as a wave of panic selling continued to hit global stock exchange, also following Trump's imposed tariffs last week. Local media reports the TAIEX, the Taiwan Stock Exchange weighted index, fell below 20,000 points for the first time since last August. Major enterprises like Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, Hon Hai, and MediaTek were among the worst affected as they reached their limit down levels.
It will just be something that he will implement, and he already implemented, in order maybe to scare a little bit the other parties. And I really hope that the international community will try to convince him that it's not the right thing to do. I don't know, to negotiate with Trump in order to not to do the same thing for the US market, because otherwise it will not be a very good thing. I think this should stop, and we should negotiate in order to regain the trust of both parties, European Union and the United States.
Joining us now from Chiang Mai in Thailand is developmental economist Choma Onyema. Choma, great to see you. Really great to see you. We tried to do this last week, didn't we? Unfortunately, the cameras were not working, but it's nice to see you in living color.
Thank you, Amarachi. I've addressed the issue.
Yeah, so we're talking about stock markets around the world that are yet to get a break or relief from the impact of Trump's tariffs. If you don't mind, explain why that is.
I think it's basically uncertainty. A lot of people are doing panic selling, and people don't know where the prices are going to. They don't know where what policies are going to come up, because this has a global impact. It's not just maybe Southeast Asia. Africa is affected. EU is affected. Asian countries are affected. So they don't really know where the volatility and the uncertainty is what is keeping the stock prices going down.
Right, and as you mentioned, the Asian stocks are also not faring any better. I just mentioned the Taiwan index, as well as in Hong Kong. The Taiwan market's down, Hong Kong market's down. President Trump has said that, Americans need to be patient, in order to see the benefits. And he even said earlier today that, the tariffs are already bringing in billions of dollars into the United States. So realistically, Choma, when do people begin to see these changes, especially in the United States?
I don't think it's something that is going to happen immediately, because people are still different government bodies are still trying to negotiate, and some are still trying to, for small countries like Cambodia, Zimbabwe, they said they want to cut tariffs. So negotiations are just beginning. So saying when they are going to see the impacts in terms of prices coming down in the US, I don't think it's something that is going to happen soon. Right now it's going to be inflation. Like, prices are going to go up, because when those goods the tariffs have started, some of the tariffs have started, and when those goods come in, definitely it's going to be an increase in the cost of production unless the exporters and importers, exporters from these countries that are being tariffed, that are paying tax, and the American consumers, the American importers decide to absorb the cost, this tariff. Otherwise, the consumers are going to feel the effects of the tariff immediately. But to hazard a guess when the prices are going to come down, I don't think I can give that, because a lot of countries are still coming up with what are we going to do. They're trying to decide what policies they're going to implement.
Right, and so the words recession and inflation are becoming more common. They become even more common with President Trump's announcement of tariffs. And this really is scary, I guess, for people in the business world. This is not something they're looking forward to. Countries are already experiencing inflation, but how much of a bleak future are we looking at here?
I think it's quite going to be severe, because like I said, it's a global impact. Certain countries, just very few countries are spared, and when I mean spared, they're just on the baseline tariff of 10%. Most other countries are having something increasing from some 10 to 50%. A country like Lesotho got, I think, either 50%, Cambodia 49%. So it's widespread, and I can't say when we're expecting things to turn around for those countries. And because of the uncertainty, like I said before, I don't think it's something that is going to happen anytime soon. And I think because of that uncertainty, it's going to keep it still. It's going to be it's going to have a severe impact. Countries are looking at probably trying to form a coordinated response, come in groups, come as a unified, in blocks rather, as regions, but the impact is going to be severe. Some countries are already defaulting on, not necessarily defaulting, they already have loans, International Monetary Fund loans, and then with this hit, a country like Sri Lanka, this tariff is going to affect it badly. So a lot of countries are going to go through tough times.
Now, Trump says that China already announced retaliatory tariffs, and I'm surprised that it is just China that he is singling out, because the European Union also said that they would also be announcing retaliatory tariffs. Trump is upset with them. He's asking, you know, how can these countries retaliate? I mean, is it out of place that countries are announcing their own retaliatory tariffs for the United States? And help us get into the mind of Trump here, why he expects that they would not retaliate.
I think he feels that that since their own tariffs are way higher than what America offers, they should be able to understand him. And I also think that he wants to bring everybody to the negotiating table. I think he wants to have dialogues and bring them to a point where different countries, where different trade departments of different economies can sit down and negotiate. I think he wants to negotiate rather than let the trade deficit continue. I think that's what he wants to do. And I also feel that he wants, probably with the tariff, it will make American companies repatriate, or rather bring back the companies back, in manufacturing industries back into the USA. So if you tell me that he thinks if it's not expecting retaliation, I don't think so. But I feel he wants to force them to negotiate rather than just keep on what it has been. I think he knows countries like China and Japan may not accept it. I'm sure he knows. I feel he should know that countries like China and Japan may not accept it without any countermeasure. I think there is this subtle power tussle between America and China, the US and China. So I'm sure he expects that certain countries, even if not the EU, certain countries like China will not accept it wholeheartedly.
Yes, and again, I fail to see, you know, how the billions of dollars are already coming in, because he says that America is already receiving billions of dollars weekly. I mean, it was just last week that he made this announcement, so I don't know how soon or what indices he's using to measure this. But let's talk about these companies, these American companies returning back to the U.S. How realistic is that? What will be the conditions that need to be in place so that these companies are able to hit the ground running as soon as they return?
I think if he's able to support them, probably there's an arrangement put in place to give some manufacturing companies a leverage, probably by any facility. I don't know what kind of facility that they can put in for companies to fall back on to absorb maybe a percentage of the cost, so that it's not pushed off to consumers alone. And then coming back is not, it's all dependent on a lot of factors. Manufacturing companies don't set up overnight. They don't come up overnight. These are decisions that take time for you to relocate a company. So if you want it to come, for them to come back, there has to be incentives in place to bring them back. And I don't really think that tariffs are just enough, because sometimes it's not only price that influences a company's decision to go elsewhere. For instance, if the raw materials that they need for manufacturing are in those countries have comparative advantage, they may want to stay where they are. And I know that price and cost is a major influence, but that's not the only factor that determines relocation of companies. So if he wants them to come back, he has to look at, here the tariff is the major factor. He has to look at way of drawing them back, probably by providing a form of relief to absorb the costs that those companies do either take or their consumers will take. And if those consumers take it, it's going to affect the quantity, as in the supply and the demand of their products.
And I've heard some analysts say that Africa needs to increase intra-Africa trade, because this will help show up the impacts of the global markets, from the global markets. And the question that follows after that is, how will you help Africa integrate? They've talked about the CFTA, the AFCFTA, beg your pardon, and how important that is for the continent. But you know, there is still this divide between the French-speaking parts of Africa and the English-speaking parts. You have the different regions on the continent, and they also have their own economic systems going. How would they integrate in order to have this shored-up market against what's currently happening?
I think one of the best ways to integrate will be building trust. And to build trust, they need to be more transparent and there needs to be more transparency and accountability, transparent policies. And then some member states don't feel that some of the rules are really clear to them, especially when it comes to trade disputes. How will trade disputes be resolved? So trade disputes, there should be regulations on how trade disputes will be resolved. Smaller countries that feel probably that they may not have the same equal footing with countries like Nigeria and South Africa, these things need to be discussed openly in a transparent manner. So it's actually based on building trust. The second way will be through better infrastructural integration, connecting the countries, easier access to labor, easier access, free movement. These things are there on paper, but in terms of implementation, I don't think that the implementation is actually happening the way it should. Sometimes it's easier for me to go to the UK than it is for me to get to Kenya. It's easier for me to go to maybe France than it is for me to get to Zambia. There are some countries that I may have to go through another country to get to first, just because we're not, the infrastructure for movement, for transportation and logistics are not there. So we need to work on these things, and that's how the integration can really happen. It's not just by saying it talking about it and having meetings. Actions need to start happening and happening fast.
Yeah, and you had mentioned earlier about those countries that are trying to renegotiate tariffs with the U.S. If in the event that they're successful and President Trump changes his mind maybe on the percentage of the tariffs, how would that change anything?
I would say I think the best way would be to go as a regional bloc, to negotiate as blocs rather than individual countries. Multilateralism is what I would encourage, I would suggest here, rather than, especially for small countries. Africa has a lot of small countries that their major exports are to the US. It's a significant portion of their GDP and hence a major aspect of their revenue, a major proportion of their revenue. So for such countries, going on to negotiate on it, they don't really have negotiating power. But if we can come as a bloc, that will be better for that's what I suggest. That would be much better. In terms of other countries, I also suggest that if countries can discuss internally, like you said, the ACFTA, if they can come together, this ASEAN, rather than negotiating individually, that will help go a long way in addressing this issue.
Chioma, thank you so much for joining us on the program. I know it is, you're already in tomorrow there in Thailand. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us on the program today.
Thank you, Amarachi.
Coming up after the break here on The World Today, the IDF claims it mistakenly killed 15 emergency workers in southern Gaza on March 23rd. Join us again. Welcome back to The World Today. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will be meeting with the U.S. President Donald Trump in Washington today, becoming the first foreign leader to visit Trump since he unleashed the tariffs around the world. And whether Netanyahu's visit succeeds in bringing down or eliminating Israel's tariffs remains to be seen, but how it plays out could set the stage for how other world leaders try to address the new tariffs. Netanyahu's office has put the focus of his hastily organized Washington visit on the tariffs, while stressing that the two leaders will discuss major geopolitical issues, including the war in Gaza, tensions in Iran, Israel-Turkey ties, and the International Criminal Court, which issued an arrest warrant against the Israeli leader last year. Trump in February signed an executive order imposing sanctions on the ICC over its investigations of Israel. They're also likely to discuss Israel's hopes for annexation of parts of the occupied West Bank, which the Palestinians want as the heart of their future independent state. Well, before that, the IDF over the weekend mistakenly identified a convoy of aid workers as a threat following the emergence of a video which provided or proved that their ambulances were clearly marked when Israeli troops opened fire on them. At least 15 aid workers, including 8 medics working for the Palestine Red Crescent Society, were found in a mass grave after the incident, according to the head of the UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, Jonathan Whittle. The Israeli military originally claimed an investigation found the vehicles did not have any headlights or emergency signals and were therefore targeted as they looked suspicious. Video footage, however, obtained by the PRCS and verified by media across the world showed the ambulances in a fire vehicle clearly marked with flashing red lights. In a briefing from the IDF, it said the ambulances arrived at Tel Sultan neighborhood in Rafah shortly after a Hamas police vehicle drove through. Let's talk to Elion Levi, the Israeli government spokesperson here in Tel Aviv. Elion, great to see you. Thank you for joining us on the program.
And I'll just stress former government spokesperson,
right. Former. Didn't want to include you in this administration if you didn't want to be part of it. But thank you for joining us on the program. And I think it must be really hard, you know, listening to the idea of having to admit it did make a mistake with killing those emergency workers. How does that make you feel, hearing the IDF admit this?
Yeah, this is a very serious incident, and it's especially serious because the IDF holds itself to such high standards. Unlike Hamas, which just makes things up and makes up numbers moments after an airstrike, the IDF is very serious about rigorously checking facts, making sure all the information that is given to journalists is accurate. And that's why it's especially upsetting that the initial probe got it wrong. And it's right now that the IDF is saying we're committed to an independent investigation headed by a major general to work out what happened in that incident and make sure that we learn our lessons. Now, this is a very serious incident. And I should say one of the things that makes it serious is that the IDF is saying now that immediately afterwards, 6 of the so-called medics were immediately identified as being Hamas militants. The IDF might not have known at the time, but these were Hamas terrorists apparently inside the ambulance. Hamas has a long-standing strategy of weaponizing ambulances and hospitals. It's been doing it all throughout the war for anyone who's been paying attention, using ambulances to smuggle their terrorists, to smuggle their weapons. And the reason they do it is they think that they can get away with it because they think that they have immunity by exploiting the humanitarian protections of ambulances. It's a sick strategy that puts innocent civilians at risk, and it's a strategy that the world has to insist that the Hamas terror regime in Gaza stop doing.
So, Elion, you know, the IDF has been generalizing, you know, with Hamas terrorists and saying, you know, every time they're possibly using those ambulances and using, you know, those aid workers' vehicles, but like you rightly pointed out, but in this instance, they weren't. So would it have helped if the IDF had possibly stopped and checked, verified before allowing, you know, the ambulances to go by? It just seemed a bit rash, a bit hasty to assume that there were Hamas militants in the vehicles that those aid workers were in as well.
Look, let's be clear. The facts of the case are not clear yet. I don't know exactly what happened there, and the IDF doesn't know exactly what happened there. That is why it has put in place an independent investigation to get to the bottom of the case and work out what happened. What the IDF says is this: this was taking place in an active war zone. In an active war zone where just an hour earlier at the same spot, there was a shootout with Hamas terrorists who were trying to use the same road. An active war zone in which Hamas terrorists regularly, not rarely, regularly use ambulances to disguise their terrorists, fight out of civilian clothes because they're trying to lay an ambush for Israeli soldiers. How do Hamas terrorists fight? They try to get as close to Israeli soldiers as possible, making them think they're civilians, and then they open fire. So we're dealing with a very complicated urban warfare environment where Hamas is trying to make it deliberately difficult for Israel to separate between civilians and combatants. That's part of the Hamas regime's strategy in order to stay in power, to try to get innocent civilians hurt by fighting out of hospitals, by fighting out of ambulances. Now, I don't know exactly what happened here, and I await to see the results of the IDF investigation so we can get to the bottom of the case. But I would note, unlike Hamas, whenever there is an airstrike, it immediately makes up a number. Israel doesn't do that. In fact, in this case, it took over a week for the IDF to put out its first response. Now, that's too slow, but it does mean that the IDF was waiting for the initial probe, which turned out to be wrong, and they're double-checking it. But the IDF did give time for that initial probe in order to be able to give the media the most honest answers.
Fresh airstrikes on Gaza following Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's order for retaliation for one of the heaviest barrages of rocket fire by Hamas in months. How is it that, recent IDF attacks on Gaza, the buffer zones that, they have expanded, has really not helped in curbing Hamas activities in Gaza?
That's an excellent question. 18 months into the war that Hamas started, the Hamas regime in Gaza is still able to shoot missiles at Israeli homes. Last night, they fired 10 missiles at Israel. 5 of them hit directly. 1 man was injured and had to be taken to hospital. Israelis are saying this war has to end with all the hostages home and with Gaza no longer a threat to Israel. We can't accept a reality that we have a jihadi regime on our borders, right? Our own little Boko Haram that can fire missiles whenever we want. Now, how is it possible that Hamas can still fire missiles? Well, the answer is there are whole areas of the Gaza Strip where the IDF hasn't been operating so far, like the Deir el-Balah area in central Gaza. The reason the IDF hasn't been operating is intelligence that the hostages might be being held there. Let's remember, 59 hostages, 24 are still alive, the rest have been murdered. They're being starved, they're being tortured, they're being held in underground tunnels. And the IDF hasn't been acting in areas where it thinks the hostages are being held because it doesn't want them to be hurt. And that means that there are still areas of Gaza where Hamas's military machine is still intact, and it's still able to use those as a launch pad for murderous attacks against Israeli civilians.
I don't know how much the Israeli people believe that the Netanyahu government is really working to find those hostages, because it has taken so long. There have been a lot of military activity, a lot of deaths so far. They've complained about the ceasefire, which they say Hamas has not observed, and that, it is possible that some hostages may have been killed as a result of these Israeli attacks on Gaza. How much patience do the Israeli people still have for this government to return those hostages?
You raise a very difficult question. Israeli society is united that we have to achieve 2 things, okay? We have to return all the hostages, and we have to remove the Hamas regime from power. Because we can't go back to a world in which Hamas can just invade and take more hostages whenever it wants. Now, how do we get the hostages home? Hamas is holding them for a ransom. It's holding them for a ransom. Hamas is demanding that in exchange for releasing hostages, we will release thousands of convicted terrorists who we know will go back into terrorism and will take more hostages in future. Hamas is demanding an end of the war that leaves Hamas in power, free to plot the next October 7th. So, there's a reason that most countries don't pay a ransom to terrorist hostage takers. because they understand that when you pay a ransom, it only encourages more hostage taking. And Israeli society is having a painful debate about the price that we should pay, the ransom that we should pay to get the hostages back. Everyone wants them home. But many people say we should pay whatever ransom we have to pay, give Hamas whatever we have to give, and other people, including some families of the hostages, say you can't pay a ransom to terrorists. The only way is to keep up the military pressure until Hamas has no option but to release the hostages. But it's a very painful debate in Israeli society. How do you free hostages who are being held by a jihadi regime that is holding them in underground tunnels, that is starving them, and is threatening to execute them if rescue forces get anywhere near? It's an impossible question.
Question, I guess, also impossible to answer. Alon, thank you so much for speaking with us. Former Israeli government spokesperson. And now we take a closer look at the politics and economics of renewable energy in Nigeria. This is a sector with potential facing significant challenges. As Africa's largest oil producer, Nigeria is heavily reliant on fossil fuels, which accounts for over 80% of exports and government revenue. But recent global trends and policies are pushing the country towards a more sustainable energy future. Nigeria, with its vast natural resources, is positioned to harness renewable energy, as solar, wind, and biomass are abundant across the country. However, political will remains inconsistent. We have some people in the studio who might have answers to that. Joining me now is a foreign affairs commentator, Colin Sweke, a friend of the House, and Thomas De Boyle, commercial director of CBL ACP Chamber of Commerce. Both came in from Belgium. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate the company. And I remember this is like, you know, what happened last year. You were also here in our studio. It's been 1 year since your visit. And you were also here, you know, talking about a summit that was coming up towards the end of the year, which is October. How did last year's summit go?
Great. Well, I love that question. I can say last year's summit was a great success. We had, in total, on the main event in Brussels, a crowd of, I would say, almost up to 200 people in total. If you calculate everybody present at that day, we had a very nice delegation of 30 to 40 Nigerian companies. We also had high-level representatives from the government. So we were very pleased of what happened last year, and this year we want to take it again a notch higher. I'm very pleased to already mention that we have the Minister of Aviation confirmed, Dr. Festus. He will be joining us in Brussels in October. And then, of course, we are again in Nigeria this week to promote the business forum, to have our 2 kickoff receptions. And tomorrow we have the reception in Lagos. On Thursday we'll be having the reception in Abuja at the residence of the Belgian ambassador. So I would say last year was a big success, and we are looking forward to replicate the same and even do it bigger.
So, Collins, many Nigerians who were not there last year are probably wondering, what are we talking about? What is this conference that they're talking about that we don't know anything about?
Well, it means they've not been watching Channel TV, have they?
Possibly?
Yeah, well, the point is this. Belgium harbors quite a number of treasures, as little as it is, part of which will be of immense benefit to Nigeria. Now, I happen to be a Nigerian, born, raised here, but at some point migrated to Belgium, and I discovered some of those treasures. At this point, what I try to do is identify those treasures and then package them in a way that it makes sense to the Nigerians, particularly the Nigerian investors, but also, you know, convincing the Belgian investors that Nigeria is a very, very important destination if you want to face the new frontier of business, which is Africa. Nigeria can be a hub. So that's essentially how we landed at where we are. Now, trying to, link people up to start investing together and making money together.
So where does renewable energy come into this discussion? It is a big, quite unexplored market, I would say. Where do these investors come in? How can they plug in?
Well, I think the synergies are there to be made between I would say, the European companies and the Nigerian companies. Of course, in this instance, we are talking about the Belgium and the Luxembourg companies. I think that there's a very nice mix between Belgium and Luxembourg. On one side, you have the Belgium technical know-how, and then you have on the other side, the Luxembourg side that can bring in the finance. You have, of course, the European Investment Bank that's located in Luxembourg. So I think there's an opportunity to bring these three markets on the table and explore these synergies in the renewable energy sector. And of course, we are thinking about solar energy, which is the big one. Biomass was mentioned. And these are also all topics and sectors of focus of the business forum. So I would say any Nigerian company looking to explore those partnerships should definitely join us in October in Brussels to get in contact with the relevant companies in Belgium and Luxembourg to explore those partnerships and start working together.
But with the current economic realities in Nigeria, I'm sure that there are companies that are thinking, is this really a profitable venture? How much profit would I be able to make in a market like this? When you talk about renewable energy, it almost sounds like you're talking to the elite in Nigeria and those who should know. But to those who really need it, how do you explain this to them?
Well, how to explain it to them is to make them feel it in terms of those who understand it and those who see the benefit, financial benefit to be made out of investing in it, to create the opportunity for them to invest. And then when you achieve what we call energy mix, whereby through different sources, solar is there, biomass, biogas, thermal energy, and so on and so forth. When you have all of those together, okay, you create a kind of pool from which individuals can tap. Now, once people begin to no longer have to ration electricity, they have constant supply of electricity, but there's nothing more to explain to them. And so what we're doing essentially is organizing that table so that those who understand and are willing and able to invest and make money, that they do so that it then trickles down to the everyday Nigerian.
Isn't it expensive?
Well, I think also we have to look at the point of view that, of course, what are we talking about is really the commercial scale, the large investment projects, setting up biomass plants, setting up solar plants. So as my colleague Collins was mentioning, if you have that mix of different sources of energy in your grid, you have a more stable energy supply, then of course, naturally, the prices should go down. But of course, there are investments to be made. But I believe through these partnerships, there are avenues to get funds from the European Union. So we are there as a platform to be used from all sides. So again, that's a call for the Nigerian companies to come on board. And we are in Nigeria this week, in Lagos and Abuja. So if you want to see us, this is the time.
Right, we have provided the platform, and we're sure that you'll be getting calls very soon. We wish you both a wonderful stay in Nigeria. I don't know if you have any last words. Perhaps you have some comments to make about maybe the Chamber of Commerce and the partnership between Belgium, Luxembourg, and Nigeria. People only think of just Belgium and Nigeria. They don't ever think of Luxembourg. It's a really small country in Europe. How important is it, however, to relations between Nigeria and Belgium?
Yes. Well, I would say, from our point of view, as I mentioned, we see that the partnership between the three countries is quite interesting and important because Luxembourg is there, of course, on the financial side. They finance a lot of projects. And for example, you have an organization called the House of Startups in Luxembourg, and they've actually financed already a lot of Nigerian startups. And this is information that many Nigerians might not be aware about. So yes, I think it's very important to include Luxembourg. And on the last words, I would say we have our CBL ACP representative based in Lagos, so we have somebody representing the chamber in Lagos. So if there are any companies that want to know more about the business forum happening in October, or just about the market of Belgium and Luxembourg, reach out to us. We are there to assist you, to guide you, and to make the partnerships happen.
Well, Collins has a Nigerian connection, right?
Well, that's the point. I mean, a Belgian Nigerian, who stands, in the middle of the two, trying to see where the benefits are on both sides. And that's essentially, what this is all about for me, trying to create the linkages for the two countries that I love and cherish so much.
Yeah, we thank you both for making the time to be here. We know you have so many engagements today. We will be reaching out to you. We'll keep in touch. And of course, we'll be following the progress on the summit coming up. Thank you so much for coming to Channels Television.
Thank you so much for having us.
We're off on another break now on The World Today. Still ahead. 3D printing technology comes to the aid of low-income families in Colombia. Find out what that's all about later. Welcome back. Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali have been touted as pioneers in showing what Africa can achieve when it searches inwards for solutions to its developmental problems. Presidential hopeful in the upcoming Ivorian elections, Dr. Ousmane Camara says intra-African trade would help cushion the impact of changes to the global market.
There are a reason for us today not to be ashamed anymore of stating that the change is possible, and it is possible immediately. We don't even need a transition. And it's not about even turning the back on France or anyone. It's about standing for your people. Because let's forget about that back to France. France is standing for France. Why should we continue to stand for others but ourselves? Ibrahim Traore has given us the example. You can say no and nothing will happen to you. And what I'm pledging for today for all the other African countries, especially the other countries in ECOWAS, and especially to the rulers, please, don't let the coup come to your country. Don't let the coup happen. Open the field of politics. Respect your compatriots. Give them the right to run and say their mind. Allow them to win when they are the one who have to win. Otherwise, a coup will come because people are tired. This misery has been here for too long, and we are too many people. In the 70s, Ivorians were less than 10 million people for the same territory, same resources. Today we are 31 million. The pressure on the land, the pressure on the resources is not the same as in the 70s. So you cannot continue doing the same thing, thinking that nothing will happen. If you don't change, what happened to Burkina, to Mali, to Niger will happen. But we prefer the change to be a more consensus, then the civilians and the military still do their work, and the civilians still run the country, but in a better way for the satisfaction of everybody. Burkina is now industrializing. They used to say Burkina is poor, but with the small money that they have, they are building industries.
Dr. Camara also extolled Nigeria as a leader in Africa, pivotal to his political ambition.
Nigeria. I came to Nigeria the first time in 1993. I was 14 years old. Now, growing up and understanding the position, the strength of Nigeria in Africa, and the strength of Nigerians in other economies. Even in the US, they are outstanding. In South Africa, they are outstanding. In the Ivory Coast, they are outstanding. Almost everywhere you go, you have African communities. Wherever you see them, the strongest one and the most vocal ones are Nigerians. So for us, that affirmation of Nigeria, we need it.
You can watch more of Dr. Kamara's interview. It airs on Diplomatic Channel tonight at 8:30 in the UK and on Sky 515 and at 11:30 p.m. on the DSTV platform. There can be no nation building without good governance, and separating the two is like taking a fish out of water and expecting it to survive. A highlight of discussion during the 14th edition of the Pan-African Leadership Symposium and Honors held at the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs in Lagos. Speakers were drawn from the legislation, security, government, and traditional rulers who honored the event.
There are not many occasions you find diplomats, traditional rulers, legal luminaries, past government officials and politicians gathered in the same room, participating in several discussions on the future of Nigeria and Africa.
I think so, because I was not there when he said it.
But they are all here on the invitation of the International Peace and Governance Council for the 14th edition of the Pan-African Leadership Symposium and Honors.
This symposium creates a platform, an avenue for Africans and Pan-Africanists to share their values and to share their knowledge from the wealth of knowledge about major crises ravaging the continent of Africa.
Every leader must understand that it is incumbent on them as leaders to be accountable to the people. The power belongs to the people. And if the people bring you to an elective office, a position of authority as a leader, you must be able to carry your citizenry along.
Hand in hand with good governance is mediation, reconciliation, and alternative dispute mechanisms which help to create the right environment for good governance to thrive, as emphasized by Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Professor Roland Otaru.
The objective of arbitration, negotiation, mediation, conciliation is to settle dispute. So they are peacemakers. And that is why I refer to chapter 5, verse 9 of the Bible, where Jesus Christ said during the Beatitude that blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. So you discover that even the two holy books, they make provision for peace.
Just like you mentioned in Burkina Faso.
Some speakers in the room highlight the example Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger pose for Africa in fully breaking ties with colonial masters. Burkina Faso's ambassador in Nigeria says relations with ECOWAS will be on a country-by-country basis.
We don't realize any hostility towards Burkina Faso, but what is important here is for African countries to wake and to know what is the interest of Africa and to fight for the interests of Africa.
The event progresses to the evening, where Channels Television's diplomatic editor, Amarachi Ubani, was awarded an Ambassador of Peace and Most Outstanding Female Journalist of the Year in Diplomacy and International Relations in Africa. The United Nations International Peace and Governance Council is a civil society diplomatic organization devoted to the promotion of sustainable peace, good governance, advocacy, and poverty eradication across the globe.
Now, India's weather department has warned of high temperatures in parts of northern India, including the capital, Delhi, for at least this week. The meteorological department has said northern and central states, including Haryana, Punjab, Rajasthan and Gujarat, can expect maximum temperatures across 40 degrees Celsius. It's issued a yellow alert, which means the heat is tolerable for the general public, but can cause moderate health concerns for infants, the elderly and people with chronic diseases. And thanks to 3D printed technology, many low-income families in Colombia's Antigua region will benefit from new homes. The innovative initiative is the first of its kind implemented in South America. Daniel Duque, an executive at Future Tech, explains the idea emerged 2 years ago to provide solutions to Colombia's housing shortage. It started as laboratory scale, then moved to a pilot scale, and in the future, the goal is for this technology to become industrialized. The construction company in charge of the state says that this new method is much more efficient than conventional techniques, as build time is significantly reduced. And that's the world today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.